Hi, can you hear me okay?
I can hear you very well. How many podcasts have we done now since the beginning of March?
I've lost count. I have absolutely no idea. I've done a lot.
I'm so glad to see you. We're due for a tea on a patio somewhere, or maybe another kind of beverage, and get a debrief.
I believe there's one coming up soon next week.
Oh, excellent. Very good. Um, now I'm a little bit frazzled. You have to because I've been kind of running the show here
You want me
since
to just
early
launch
this
straight into it?
afternoon. That would be lovely. People, the members who are in the audience watching, we have, of course, at the bottom of the screen, a Q&A. You're welcome to put in questions for Mia. Before you jump in, I want to congratulate you on your new role as director of Genspect Canada. I'm very, very excited that this project is launching. It's Genspect has done incredible work and tremendous people involved with the organization. You've been working with them for some time, and so I think the title of your talk is something about what's next for Canada or something to that effect. Uh,
That's right. It's well, the WPATH files and then what's next for Canada. I can share my screen. I'm going to try
yes,
and
yeah,
share
you've
my
got
screen.
privileges.
I'm not necessarily gifted technologically. Okay, there we go. Is that good?
Looks great, Mia.
Okay, so this is my talk. I'm not sure who's in the audience. I assume probably most people are aware of the WPATH files, but I'm going to go through, give a brief overview of WPATH and the files. So, first of all, we released this March 4th, 2024, and it has been quite the experience. We got a lot of coverage internationally, disappointingly little coverage in Canada, but that should surprise absolutely no one. So, first, what's WPATH? This is that gentleman that you see on the screen there. That is Harry Benjamin, Dr. Harry Benjamin. He is the man without whom there would be no gender medicine scandal. I believe he is the person responsible for kicking the whole thing off. And WPATH, when it was first launched in 1978, was named after Harry Benjamin. It was the Harry Benjamin International Gender Dysphoria Association, which is HIVIGDA. So in the early decades, I do believe that this loose affiliation of people were at least attempting to pursue science in a very strange, misguided way. But they were trying to help a tiny cohort in society who were struggling with their sexed body. But then in the late 1990s, this group started to take a turn for the ideological, and that can be explained simply by the fact that the modern trans rights movement was just getting off the ground at the same time, and trans activists started to join WPATH. And the group's goals then became primarily political, and science was, becoming less and less important. So as you see on the screen there, oh no, first. So in 2007, they rebrand as the World Professional Association for Transgender Health. And this change is significant. They self-identify as the world leading transgender healthcare group, a professional group. And at the helm, interestingly, president of WPATH at that time was none other than Stephen Whittle, who many of you may know is a trans-identified female and an extremely prominent member of the early trans rights movement, very influential. So from 2007, with Whittle at the helm, the goals, this is a political organization. It is not a scientific organization. In 2010, we get the de-psychopathologization statement. This is WPATH based on no science whatsoever, entirely political. They decide that being transgender is not a mental illness. So they decide that gender identity disorder, it was at the time, is not a mental illness. It's perfectly natural, healthy state of being, and you should celebrate it, and there should be nothing but affirmation. And from that point onwards, we enter the era of affirmation and access to hormones and surgeries on demand, because you can no longer view this as a mental illness in which the sufferer needs support and help, and you need to explore why it's come about. None of that is allowed because we're forbidden from calling it a mental illness. So they produced Standards of Care 7 in 2012. That's an ideological document, very pro-affirmation, promoting puberty blockers, even though the experiment was in its infancy then, and there was absolutely no evidence to support this experiment at all. But then between 2012 and 2022, this group plunges into complete ideological terrain. And we know that because in 2022, they published their Standards of Care version 8. They had removed almost all lower age limits. There was one left, and that's phalloplasty. You have to be 18 before you can have an appendage made out of your forearm sewn onto your groin. All other lower age limits are gone. Then they have this chapter on non-binary surgeries, which we'll get to later, and the infamous eunuch chapter. Now, it will remain a source of total bewilderment to me how an organization can, a healthcare organization, internationally respected at the time, can produce guidelines with an entire chapter on eunuch as a valid gender identity deserving of hormonal and surgical affirming castration, and that not be the complete collapse of the organization, that not be the end, they fall, it's gone. But they survived. In fact, they didn't just survive. In Canada, certainly, they are still held up as the world-leading transgender healthcare group. We still follow them from coast to coast. Basically, the eunuch chapter didn't harm them at all in Canada. So, WPATH Files. First of all, what are they? I write for Michael Shellenberger, as most people probably know. And I was covering gender for him when I'd only been with him about a month. When he got his hands, somebody gave him the WPATH Files, hundreds of pages of leaked internal communications from WPATH's messaging forum. And so they show, first of all, there were no real surprises in there for anyone who's been following WPATH. We all knew that this was a group that had no respect for the Hippocratic Oath, that this was a political activist group masquerading as a medical group. But it's nice to have proof. And so the WPATH Files are proof of just how ideological this group is. So the files show that the WPATH is conducting an unregulated experiment on some of the most vulnerable people in society, that its members are aware that cross-sex hormones have debilitating and potentially fatal side effects, that these doctors, they know that they're causing harm, and they know that they're experimenting with these hormones and surgeries, and also that they have absolutely no respect for detransitioners and the possibility of regret. So I have a few examples of what we found in the files. First of all, when they're talking about children and adolescents, basically it shows that they know they see everything we see. So we have been saying for years that children cannot understand the lifelong implications of fertility loss. They can't understand the powerful effects of the hormones. They don't understand how puberty blockers work. They are not mature enough to understand any of this. We've been saying that for years, but now we know that WPATH members, they also say it on the inside. They also know. So the lead author of the child chapter, the co-author of the child chapter is talking at Diane Berg. She's talking about how then it's out of the developmental range of these kids to understand how these medical interventions impact them. They'll say something, she'll say, they say something and you realize they didn't understand they were going to have facial hair. meaning that these children cannot consent. Obviously, if they don't understand what they're letting themselves in for, they cannot consent. Then the star of the WPATH Files, Dr. Danial Metzgar, a Canadian endocrinologist at the BC Children's Hospital, he says, we're explaining these things to kids who haven't even had high school biology yet. And when talking about fertility preservation, he says, when you're talking to a 14-year-old about fertility preservation, he says, I know it's like I'm talking to a blank wall. They're like, ooh, baby's gross. So, of course, we've all been saying it all along, teenagers don't understand fertility loss. It's perfectly developmentally normal for a teenager to say that they will never want children. And we all know, I was a 13-year-old girl once, I would have said the same. All the way up until probably 28 years old, I would have said the same. And then when I hit 30, baby fever hit me. I had to have a baby right away. And then I had 3 children, became a stay-at-home mother. I was breastfeeding, co-sleeping, baby wearing. I transformed into a different person because nobody robbed me of that chance to grow and mature the way these doctors are doing so. And then, of course, we've got Christine McGinn in the US, who has performed 20 vaginoplasties on under 18s. And he says not all had perfect outcomes. Now, WPATH, so they have this very carefully crafted public image that they are science-based, evidence-based. And when they talk to the press, they're always, gender affirming care, as they call it, the hormone surgeries. It's life-saving, medically necessary. It's improving the health of the people who identify as transgender. And on the inside, they say very different things. The very chilling conversation that we found was when they're talking about this 16-year-old female patient who's got large liver masses, probably brought on by the testosterone that she's been on. And the doctor who replies is actually a Canadian doctor from New Brunswick, if I remember correctly. And the doctor replies to say, oh, yeah, I had a friend who was on testosterone for 8 to 10 years and developed liver cancer, terminal liver cancer. And to the best of my knowledge, it was linked to his hormone treatment. And then the cancer was so advanced that this woman died a couple of months later. And then that's the end of the conversation inside WPATH. Nobody says, oh my goodness, what are we doing? What if there's a ticking time bomb? What if in 20 years' time, all of these young female patients are going to develop liver cancer? Nobody says that. Nobody seems to care. We have never done this. We've never pumped women full of testosterone. We've never pumped teenage girls full of testosterone on a large scale before. So we don't know what the outcome is. And it's very likely that the outcome is not going to be good in 20 years' time. And then there are the immediate detrimental side effects that I find really distressing to read about. We've got the teenage girls with vaginal and uterine atrophy, bleeding, pain, painful orgasms. The males don't seem to do very well on estrogen either. We've got erections feeling like broken glass. That doesn't sound like very much fun to me. And then we have got what I think is the example of what shows how far off the rails this organization has gone. This organization that from coast to coast in Canada, we hold up as the leading transgender healthcare group. We follow their standards of care. They are the non-binary surgeries. So the Hippocratic Oath has been completely abandoned with these people. This is extreme body modification on demand with no medical justification whatsoever. This is Thomas Satterwhite performing surgeries, mastectomies without nipples, creating customized scars after a mastectomy with customized scars. He's doing the nullification procedures, which creates a smooth, sexless body for people who identify as neither male nor female. The phallus-preserving vaginoplasty, that's if you're a man and you want to keep your penis and have a a surgically created vagina out of a section of your colon. There's, if you see the activist law professor there from Alberta, many people I'm sure can guess who that person is, thinks that gender medicine is basically about providing trans people with their embodiment goals, whatever they want. We've got there the vagina preserving phalloplasty. So that's if you are a woman and you want to have your arm, your forearm appendage sewn onto your groin, but you want to keep your vagina because you think you're both male and female. And now the doctor at the bottom, I think this is actually, I agree with him. He says, I think we're going to see a wave of non-binary affirming requests for surgery that will include all of these non-standard procedures. He's seen non-binary people, agender, eunuchs, and they're all requesting body types that don't exist in nature. Now, I do think that he's right, that if we cannot end WPATH and if we cannot demand that everybody reject everything that WPATH stands for, we are going to see a wave of these non-binary surgical requests. And that, frankly, is not a world that I want to live in. Then, if you allow a group of extremist political activists to conduct an unregulated experiment on some of the most vulnerable people in society with no safeguarding, no guardrails, no respect for the Hippocratic Oath, you are guaranteed to get a large number of people who regret the decision that they made. And WPATH members, of course, when they're faced with detransition, it creates a lot of cognitive dissonance because detransitioners are the living, breathing proof that gender affirming care causes harm. So they have the little tricks to deal with it. Well, first of all, Danial Metzgar is in there again saying there's regret, and I don't think it surprises any of us. So they kind of know what they're doing. They know that there's regret. They know that they're causing harm, and yet still they do it. But we've got Bowers, Marcy Bowers, the president, saying acknowledgement that detransition exists even to a minor extent is off limits for many in our community. Bowers at another point in the files is saying people have to own and take active responsibility for the decisions that they make, particularly if they are permanent medical decisions. Now, Bowers is the president of WPATH, and WPATH is the organization that for the last 15 years has campaigned relentlessly to remove all guardrails from around this very harsh, brutal, experimental treatment pathway. WPATH is the reason why so many young people are being harmed, because WPATH took away the guardrails, took away all the safeguarding. And then for Bowers, the president, to turn around and blame the victim is obviously completely despicable. Then you've got other members saying individuals are entitled to make their own mistakes. At the end of the day, it's a risk-benefit decision. So this person is saying, oh, it would be great if we could actually perfectly clear everyone prior to surgery, but at the end of the day, it's a risk-benefit. If they can't cope with the arduous dilation schedule afterwards and they have complications, that's their decision. They really don't care about the outcomes, these people. And then there's the idea that detransitioning is problematic because it frames being cisgender as the default and reinforces transness as a pathology. That brings us back to this deep psychopathologization campaign that I was talking about at the beginning. If you are pretending that being transgender is a perfectly natural, healthy state, healthy variation of human existence, and not a psychiatric disorder in need of psychotherapeutic support, then of course you're going to be offended by anything that suggests medical transition, being trans is pathological. Now, how influential is WPATH in Canada? So I looked this morning and I found that we have 242 Canadian members, which is an extraordinarily high number. because in the UK, this as of this morning had 70 members, and we have a much smaller population. So all of our provincial health insurance looks to WPATH to define what is medically necessary care. Our major medical associations, the Canadian Pediatric Society, the Canadian Psychological Association, Canadian Psychiatric Association, they all recommend WPATH standards of care. Many of our children's hospitals, the gender clinics, they proudly follow WPATH. I mean, CHEO, Sick Kids, they've got WPATH members in the gender clinics. WPATH experts are quoted endlessly in the mainstream media. If you look at Danial Metzgar is frequently interviewed in by the CBC. And yet when he's talking to the CBC, he will say, you know, puberty blockers are safe, reversible, this is age appropriate. He is not saying what he says privately to the CBC, I can assure you of that. And then KSV Ontario, this is now the famous case, the case of the second set of genitals. It shows how dangerous it is when a nation follows an extremist group of trans activists who have absolutely no respect for evidence-based medicine or science. In this case of the man in Ontario who he wanted to keep his penis and have his colon vagina, OHIP said, no, we're not paying for that. He appealed, and his appeal was based on the fact that forcing a non-binary person to go through binary surgery was conversion therapy, a totally nonsense argument, but they ruled in his favor. One of the reasons why they ruled in his favor is because the WPATH Standards of Care 8 that the province of Ontario follows has the entire chapter on non-binary surgeries. So they ruled that it's medically necessary gender-affirming care. Went back and forth again, appeal, and then he won again. So the Ontario taxpayer is paying for a very mentally ill man to have a surgically created vagina out of a section of his colon. And he's going to go down to Texas just to add insult to injury. We're going to pay for him to have that created down in Texas at a very dubious gender clinic. Now, let me see if I can stop sharing my... Okay. So what's next for Canada? This is the hard part, because I think, as many of us know, and as I hope my presentation has shown, WPATH's style of gender-affirming care it's no exaggeration to say that it's one of the greatest crimes in the history of modern medicine. And so it's the duty of all Canadians to speak up and demand that it end. But having been in this debate for a long time, every international development that happened, when the Kira Bell ruling happened, I thought, this is it. Canada will finally have to pay attention. When Sweden's systematic review and the CAS report, every time I thought, this has to be it. We can't ignore this any longer. And then we carried on ignoring it. So we're in a difficult situation here because we seem to think we live in a bubble and the rest of the world is of no importance whatsoever. So I would urge everyone, well, it starts with the individual, I think, because our politicians, they're not going to act unless they think it's politically beneficial for them. And that means the mood of the public has to be on the side of defending all of the vulnerable victims of this medical crime. So it starts with speaking. It starts with breaking the spiral of silence. It starts with talk to everyone you come across, everywhere you go, just talk about this. You will find that most people absolutely do not support surgeons amputating the healthy breasts of 16-year-old lesbians. People do not support that. We have to pressure our provinces to follow the lead of Alberta in banning puberty blockers, cross-sex hormones, and surgeries for adolescents. But no disrespect to Premier Smith, but Alberta needs to go further too,
Indeed.
because it's not enough to ban for under 16s. Between 16 and 25, you're still an adolescent. You're still in a stage of identity development. You're still figuring out who you are. The brain isn't, we know, the brain is not finished developing. So Alberta even needs to take it further. We have to we have to put pressure on gender clinics, health authorities, everyone to reject WPATH's ideologically motivated social justice brand of medicine. I think we should be bombarding provincial health ministers, gender clinics, health authorities with the Cass report, with the WPATH files. We should be forcing them to listen, because they are going to ignore us for as long as they possibly can. There's a good example in medical history of how long such things can go on for, and that's prenatal x-rays. They had absolute proof that prenatal x-rays were killing children, were causing childhood leukemia, and they carried on doing them for 25 more years, simply because the medical world refused to look at the truth that was staring them right in the face. So it's somewhat upon all of us to just never let up on them, keep bombarding them with the truth and try and force them to listen.
Mhm.
And lastly, I would say it's time for all politicians, everyone, journalists, politicians, Canadians from all walks of life, to stop looking the other way while this appalling medical crime unfolds in plain sight. Because, as I've said before, this is not an abstract philosophical debate, and it's not some trivial sideshow in the culture war. It's the worst, one of the worst, and I do actually believe it is the worst medical crime ever committed. And it is vulnerable Canadians, children, adolescents, and vulnerable adults who are falling victim to it. So it's time for everyone to unite. It's not a left or right issue. It's time for everyone to unite and demand that it be brought to an end.